Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, are about to do their news conference. Let's have a listen in.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this last press conference of the week following the working breakfast of the members of the European Council on the leaders' agenda and also the European Council of the EU27 on Brexit. I first invite the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, to take the floor.
Thank you, Preben. Good afternoon. Today we discuss the leaders' agenda for our work in the next 2 years, and I am happy to have received univocal support of all the EU leaders to go ahead with this plan. This is not an easy task, as the ambition of the leaders' agenda is to deal with the most contentious issues, by which I mean the Eurozone reform, migration crisis, internal security, trade, and the future financing of the EU. That is why I also proposed a new work method, perhaps somewhat more direct, but at the same time more informal. It will mean confronting the areas where European cooperation does not work well and being honest about the reasons why. Confrontation is healthy as long as it is respectful and helps us move forward. And this is the spirit of our work ahead. But what I am very pleased about today is that none of the leaders question the fact that we must work united, hand in hand, with all the member states on board. After Prime Minister May's intervention last night and our discussion about Brexit this morning, my impression is that the reports of the deadlock between the EU and the UK have been exaggerated. And while progress is not sufficient, it doesn't mean there is no progress at all. Today the Council has agreed to start internal preparatory discussions in relation to the framework for the future relationship and on transitional arrangements. It is clear that this would not be possible without the new momentum given by the Florence speech of Prime Minister May. I would like to reassure our British friends that in our internal work we will take account of proposals presented there. So the negotiations go on, and we will continue to approach them positively and constructively. And as we are all working actively on a deal, I hope we will be able to move to the second phase of our talks in December. Finally, as a result of our discussion last night on Turkey, we tasked the Commission to reflect on whether to cut and reorient pre-accession funds. It was a substantive discussion. We want to keep the door open to Ankara, but the current reality in Turkey is making this difficult. It was also stressed that Turkey needs to respect all member states in its relations with the EU, including when it comes to the implementation of the existing customs union agreement. And furthermore, we have listened to the concerns raised by President Anastasiades regarding Turkey's actions vis-à-vis the Greek Cypriots and Maronites. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now President Juncker of the European Commission.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mesdames et Messieurs. Et pour beaucoup d'entre vous.
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be relatively brief. Yesterday evening you got the opportunity to only ask about 2 questions, and that's not something we want to see become a rule for our press conferences. So I would like to be brief to give you time for some more questions today. Let me just say this. During my address on the State of the Union, I gave a detailed program on what we feel needs to be done. I put a timetable to the heads of state and government in Tallinn, taking us from here to the European elections. This was a detailed, sophisticated program which the President of the Council submitted to the heads of government and which we fully support because it reflects our own concerns but also adds a number of concerns specific to Donald. I attach a lot of importance to the summit together with the Swedish Prime Minister. We have taken the initiative to organize this summit in Göteborg in November. And I hope that we'll be able to agree on the social pillar, the European social agenda there, with a number of minimum social rights. I'm very grateful to the President of the European Council, Mr. Tusk, for having organized on the 6th of December a Euro Council, where we'll be able to deal with all issues relevant to the Eurozone. This is an initiative of the President of the European Council in the light of the desire of the President of the Commission to deepen economic and monetary union. So I'm grateful to him for having taken this initiative. Nothing on Brexit. I'm not going to say anything because there isn't anything to say on Brexit. And on Turkey, everything has already been said. I just wished to specify that, subject to the very judicious presidency of Mr. Tusk, we have agreed to reflect and make proposals on a possible redirecting of pre-accession aid and a possible downward adjustment. During the European Council, I set out a number of options on this, and we have worked on these various options. Now, we had, a short period of time just after midnight, which allowed us to talk about international trade issues. That was a debate which was introduced by the President of the Republic, and I replied to that. I remain attached to the idea that following the changes on the international scene, Europe needs to react in a positive fashion to the requests we've had from around the world for various trade agreements. We will do that in full compliance with European standards and in a spirit of reciprocity as set out by the French President. We will do everything we can to conclude our negotiations with Mercosur by the end of the year, because that's important. The importance of Mercosur for the European Union is often underestimated. That is perhaps the most important trade agreement, and in terms of volume, I think a good agreement with Mercosur is 8 times more in size than our agreement with Canada and 4 times greater than our agreement with Japan. So we do need to work on this. We repeated yesterday evening and during the night that the Commission does intend from now on to publish its proposals for mandates, and that the Council will do the same once it's adopted these mandates. It's no longer, I think, appropriate to have meetings behind closed doors. It's time, I think, for transparency. Transparency will not prevent us, however, prevent us from negotiating towards these agreements ahead of us.
Plane to Oviedo, together with President Tusk and President Tajani, because we are given the Asturias Prize. Is that correct? So we are very proud that the Spanish are recognizing the realities.
Thank you. We now open the floor for your questions, hopefully a bit more than yesterday, and we start with the gentleman there. Yes, please, Daniel.
Daniel Bröschler, Süddeutsche Zeitung. Eine Frage.
A question for President Juncker on Turkey. Quite precisely, if these funds don't go to Turkey, where will they go to?
Ask about Turkey. Was it your impression at the discussion that the leaders just think that this is not the moment to confront Turkey and to say that they don't believe in a membership of Turkey? Or is it really that they believe that one day Turkey can become member? And do they think that the situation is such that there's reason to believe that?
On your first question, the funds which are proposed that they should not go to Turkey can be used for other purposes. But I just wanted to point out that when it comes to the funds which we have for accession aid to Turkey in the budget, 1/3 of that money is used for noble purposes, supporting civil society, strengthening the rule of law. And so if we're talking about redirecting that aid, then we're going to continue.
Wenn ich das technisch so sagen darf, das europäische Parlament.
And if I could just add something to this, what I've been told is that the European Parliament is talking about putting a rather large amount of this accession aid into the budgetary reserve. And it's better to ask the European Parliament, which is the other budgetary arm, exactly what the situation is.
The Turkish accession process was yesterday very, very visible.
Thank you. We'll now go to the second question. Yes, I think the gentleman in the third row, Mark. Yes, please. No, Mark, behind.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Mark Peperkorn, Volkskrant, Netherlands. A question for Mr. Tusk, because you just said that the reports about the deadlock in the Brexit negotiations were a little bit over the top. But it was Mr. Barnier who said last week he used the word deadlock 3 times. So did Mr. Barnier then make the wrong interpretation, or did Mrs. May say something which changed the mood? Thanks.
I don't think that this is the best moment and the best place to discuss about rhetorics and some nuances, because in fact we are on the same line with Michel Barnier totally. Today I feel that this is also my obligation. I want to be also motivated, a positive motivator for the next 5 or 6 weeks, because our ambition is to achieve this. The final of the first phase in December, and for this we need also a maybe more positive narrative, and you can describe the moment in our negotiations in a very different words. But what was my feeling today, also during my meeting before our session, my tete-a-tete with Prime Minister Theresa May, I feel that for sure. Today, both sides present only goodwill, and this is why I am maybe in my rhetoric I am maybe a little bit more optimistic than Michel Barnier. But we are also in a different role. Michel Barnier is responsible for the negotiations. I am more responsible for, first of all, for our unity, but also for a good atmosphere and positive mood. This is the only difference.
In my rhetorics, I would have used the word deadlock 4 times and not only 3 times. But probably he was right, because he's at the center of the negotiation. I wanted to say, having had a look, a superficial one, because reading British press you have to be as superficial as the British press is. I want to say that our working assumption is not the no-deal scenario. I hate the no-deal scenario. And by the way, I don't know what that means. Nobody was explaining till today to me what would be the consequences of a total no-deal arrangement. I am not in favor of no deal. I want to have a fair deal with Britain.
Thank you. And we move to the gentleman in the middle. Yes, please.
Hello, Ros Atkins, BBC News. A question to both of you, if I may. Mr. Tusk, you said that on the issue of citizens' rights, there are not great differences between the two sides at the moment. Does that mean there's been some movement on the issue of the European Court of Justice? And to Mr. Juncker, if there is a deal, whatever that deal is, are you confident that Theresa May has the political strength to sell it back to her party and to her parliament?
As the Conservative Party left the European People's Party, I cannot respond when it comes to the reactions of the Conservative Party. So I do think that Mrs. May has all the strength she needs to have the British people understanding what we are achieving as a final result.
Yesterday and today I discussed with Prime Minister Theresa May about more general atmosphere, not about details. Even, I mean, of course, the problem of the European Court is not a detail. It's one of the most important things, of course. But this is for our negotiators and for the next weeks. What was important for me and for Theresa May yesterday and today, was to rebuild this atmosphere of trust and goodwill, and I think that we succeed.
Thank you, and possibly a last question, yes? Gentleman there, Georgia.
Gary Gotev de Active. En fait, c'est plutôt un commentaire.
Actually, it's more a comment on what you've just said, Mr. Juncker. I'm personally a bit worried if nobody's explained to you what would happen in the case of a hard Brexit. I was thinking that the Commission would have some scenarios that they'd thought up, even in the most unpleasant outcome. If nobody's explained it to you, I'm a bit worried. And then there's the issue of Turkey, a second question. I just want to have a clearer view. You say that everything's been said, but I don't really understand all of this. I don't see how you can keep the deal on migration if funds are going to be redirected. Might be fair enough that you gave more money to the opposition or to civil society. That would be good, perhaps, but it's certainly going to antagonise President Erdogan and his government. So I don't quite see how you think you're going to pull this off. Well, I'm going to explain it to you then, and in great detail. OK, number one. When I said nobody has explained to me what no deal meant, what I was saying was no member of the UK delegation has explained that to me. We in the Commission, Mr. Barnier along with us, know perfectly well what that might mean. But when the UK are pleading for the cause, or some people in the UK are pleading for the cause of a no deal, nobody explains in detail what they mean. It's some kind of British way of carrying out collective education, because nobody explained in the first place to the British people what Brexit actually meant. And I should make it quite clear to you that the Commission's hypothesis is not to aim for a no-deal scenario. We're doing everything we can to come up with a fair, just and balanced settlement with the United Kingdom. Now, on the second point, you're quite right to point out that I actually answered that question just earlier on. I did say that 1/3 of the pre-accession aid which we give to Turkey, 1/3 of that pre-accession aid is money which is paid to organised civil society, to those who are dealing with the rule of law, human rights and children's rights in Turkey. And we will very probably expand the amount of funds that we put in that direction. We can't take funds from pre-accession and give additional funds to refugees. We have honoured our agreement with Turkey on refugees, 3 billion and then 6 billion. 2.9 billion have been strongly committed, as we say in franglais, and we've disbursed million or so. But the European Union will respect its commitments with Turkey, and Turkey will respect its, of course.
Okay, I think this concludes the press conference. Thank you very much for attending.
Adios.
And have a good.
Okay, you just heard from Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker speaking following that crucial summit of EU leaders really assessing Brexit negotiations. And I have to say the word of the day has to be optimistic. Donald Tusk saying the deadlock being reported between negotiators, between the EU and UK negotiators, has actually been exaggerated, adding that though there is more progress to be made, it's not at the stage of a deadlock that has been reported, also adding that he hopes that the second phase of Brexit talks to move on in December. Jean-Claude Juncker also sharing that same optimistic tone, saying that he actually would hate a no-deal scenario, actually reiterating something that he told Sky News earlier. And in addition, Donald Tusk also saying that it was Theresa May's Florence speech which was essential to this new momentum on Brexit talks. And Theresa May saying the same thing just earlier, also having her press conference, just really reiterating, just letting people know exactly where they stand. And she too said the same thing, that it was a Florence speech that offered two important steps, that added a new energy to negotiations. Essentially, it was that firm commitment on that financial settlement that she spoke about at that Florence speech, and also a time-limited implementation period. Again, Donald Tusk saying that it was this speech in Florence that added a real new momentum to these Brexit talks. So definitely a more positive tone coming out of these negotiations today.
So what did we learn from that news conference? Has the Brexit deadlock been broken, or was there even a deadlock in the first place? To discuss this, we're joined now by the political correspondent for The Telegraph, Kate McCann, and political editor for The New Statesman, George Eaton. Very good afternoon to you both. Thanks for joining us